Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our last session of the day for our virtual Let's Learn Live Summit. Thank you to all those who have stuck around with us throughout the day here. As a reminder for anyone who may have just jumped on, we started the call by placing everybody on mute. So if you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the question box on the upper right-hand side of the screen to ask any questions that may come up. At the end, we'll have time for a Q&A with our presenter. If you're interested in submitting for CPE credit for attending this session, please be sure to complete the survey at the end of the broadcast. This survey will be available once the session ends. Finally, we are recording this session and we'll be sending a link of the recording to all attendees within an hour after this webcast. Please refer to the handout section to download a copy of the slides. Now I'm excited to introduce your last presenter today, Senior GP Implementation Consultant, Tiffany Fluss. Tiffany has over 6 years of experience working with Dynamics GP. She started working with Microsoft Dynamics GP as a project manager and has since transitioned to the role of consultant. During this time frame, she has worked with companies across various industries to implement their Dynamics solutions. So without further ado, Tiffany, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Alex. So as mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those or enter those into our question panel. You also see, following the conclusion of this presentation, any handouts and documentation as well. From an agenda perspective, we're going to go through several different items here. We're going to start with navigation lists for things like if you're using GP workflow, I'll expose you to how you can leverage those to make that process a little bit more efficient. If you're not, I'll show how you can use navigation lists for your everyday transaction processing, whether that's reviewing edit lists for batches or even processing payables or GL transactions. Next, we'll flow into what's called the Purchase Requisition Dashboard. That dashboard, if you're using the Purchase Requisition module in Dynamics GP, it's one of the newer modules, will expose you to ways that you can make that process more efficient and streamlined, particularly for those that are entering in requisitions on a day-to-day basis. I'll also show you some another unknown feature that's not used as frequently, and that's the Excel refreshable reports. I'll expose you to the out-of-the-box ones, and we'll mention that if you are using products like E1 Solutions, there's capability around leveraging those reports as part of your export refreshables. And then finally, I'll end with a very popular one, which is our Smart List, and expose you a little bit to how you can maximize the benefits of Smart List via export solutions. So again, just to get us kicked off, so our navigation lists, quite frankly, they're used or most frequently used with workflow. If you're an avid workflow user, you might have seen those within the application. If you're not a workflow user, again, I'll show you ways you can use them for general processing. And here's our purchase requisition dashboard. Again, that's quickly used for your purchase requisition users to help them manage that process. Here's our Excel refreshable reports. And then finally, that Smart List export solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into Dynamics GP at this point in time and walk through those pieces. For that first one, the navigation list, I'm going to focus my attention first on the financial series, but I will expose you to other areas you can use this, especially if you are that workflow user. So I'm going to go ahead and in my financial series over on the left-hand side, you'll start noticing in this case, general ledger batch approval. So that's one area that there are some predefined or pre-built navigation lists available to you. Go ahead and go into one that I've predefined, and that's called general ledger batches. I've labeled it as pending posting. The reason I've done that is In this, you'll notice that it's going to show all the available batches that are sitting out in my financial series. They're waiting for my review. The benefit of using the navigation list, as you can kind of see here, is it's going to give you that all-in-one encompassing view. It's going to give you the entry totals all in one screen of the journal entry counts, the batch counts, and let's say I want to take a deeper dive and review that batch before I post it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this check mark box, and up here at the top you'll notice that I'll have some highlighted or illuminated features available to me. Some of those actions in this case include posting if I wanted to, but maybe I'm not at the stage yet to post it. Maybe I want to do something such as pull an edit list to review that batch. And go up to my report section, click print edit list. And that's going to pull directly to my screen my edit list, a very common report that you'd be using to review your batches. So yep, this looks good. Go ahead and close that down. Let's say I want to take this one step further. Maybe I want to go in and edit directly from this navigation list that batch. A couple ways I can do that. I click that edit icon. It's going to take me directly to the batch entry screen. Again, a very common feature for folks that are processing the journal ledger batches. They can pull up from there the transactions and then identify the journal entry that perhaps they want to modify. If that doesn't work for you, you could actually go ahead and close this down, close this window down as well. You can go back and highlight that batch, and I can select Go To and click View Transactions. And then this will pull up the individual transactions, again in a navigation list-like format, for me to review and edit. So let's say I want to edit this journal entry. So I'm going to highlight on that item. And you can see I saved myself a couple of clicks by going in that approach. And so let's say I want to make an adjustment here. This would actually be $100. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and hit save, and then I can close down my transaction entry. And then I can close down my edit account transaction navigation list. I can refresh my batch and it will update my total. Some other things that you can do all within this navigation list. In this particular situation, I can create a new batch if I wanted to. Close it on that window, and then again hit refresh, and I'll see on my navigation list, there's that test GL batch. Some other areas that I'm seeing folks use this feature would be for workflow. So let me show you what that would look like. So for that, I'm going to transition to my purchasing module. And I'm going to use the example of vendor workflow. So again, you can see on the left-hand side, there are some predefined options, things like vendors not submitted, vendors pending approval. I'm going to go and take a look at the vendors not submitted. While this is populating, for the first time, that when you do open up the navigation list, what you're going to find is a feature in there called Business Analyzer. So Business Analyzer is going to show you some KPIs, whether it's for your vendors or for the financial series. If you wanted to speed along this navigation list in this example, I'm going to show you here how you can disable this Business Analyzer setting to speed up the process of the population of the navigation list. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on my show hide here, and I'm going to unclick Business Analyzer. So the next time when that report populates, it'll speed up a little bit for me. So going back to the maintenance for the workflow perspective, so if my vendor's not submitted, you'll see in this navigation list, I've got a series of vendors, and then here's the applicable workflow status. The reason I'm seeing it as such is you'll notice right here there is a filter where the vendor or workflow status is equal to not submitted, recall, rejected. Now in this case, again, I want to, from this navigation list, identify the vendors I want to submit for approval. I'll go ahead and select on them, and then in my actions window, I'll hit submit. So now in this case, once I hit refresh to this navigation list, I'll see that those items have disappeared or removed from this particular, say, vendors not submitted navigation list, and I'll move to the vendors pending approval navigation list. So again, as a refresher, the first time you do populate it, if you do not want to see the vendor KPIs in this case, to speed up the report, you can go ahead and click on that show as, and then remove that KPI so it speeds it up a little bit. So just as a refresher, I'm going to do that. And I'm also going to, so now at this point in time, because I have vendor workflow turned on and I move those vendors from non-submitted to pending approval, I'm going to notice a couple things now. So here's those two vendors, a travel company. I have some basic information that I've set up in my view to include the vendor ID, the contact information on the vendor card, but in particular, as it relates to workflow, I'm going to see the status, when it's due, the task time that it's due, and then a user that it's currently sitting with. There's obviously some great benefit in having this for workflow, especially if you're getting questions as an administrator of where this is sitting. It's going to save you a lot of time in a navigation list because you're going to see everything all in one page rather than clicking on a smart list or going into the individual vendor cards to identify where they are from a status perspective. Additionally, as you saw when I hit submit, I can also do mass approvals. So I can go ahead and click on the one that I want to approve. Similarly, I can click on the ones that I want to reject. So if I want to send it back to individuals. So these are just two examples of how you can use navigation lists, whether it's for workflow or even for your day-to-day batch processing within Dynamics GP. I'm going to show you before I move to the next feature, there are ways that you can customize this. So let's say I want to add in some additional columns, customize, click on columns. You can see here there's some additional fields in this particular scenario that I can add. The same thing is going to go for the other options. So where it's payables, transactions, vendor, GL batch approval processing, that sort of thing. So once I hit save, I would update those changes accordingly. All right, so the next feature that I'm going to talk about is that Procurement Dashboard. Again, this is associated to the Requisition module within Dynamics GP. It's one of the newer modules within the application. Here on my homepage, what you're going to see with this feature is our Procurement Dashboard. The one thing to note is our procurement requisition status. So any of the requisitions that I'm submitting, these are going to be unique to me. So I'm not going to be able to see, unfortunately, a requisition that a colleague might have entered. I'm only going to see what I have physically entered. Now, of course, there are some benefits to that, especially from where we've seen it. When the requisition module is turned on and within the application and people are using it, typically those requisition users are very limited in their role, meaning that they're really just going into the application to enter in a requisition, maybe find a requisition, reprint a requisition, and that's about it. So setting up those users with their homepage turned on with the procurement dashboard is a great benefit to you as an administrator or those that are maintaining the process within GP. It's going to save you some questions, particularly like, oh, I forgot how to get to the enter in the requisition, or I forgot how to view the requisition. It's actually all just going to be right on their homepage for them. So take a deeper dive into the feature and how I got this to my homepage. The first thing that I'm going to show you here is I'm going to go to customize this page. And I want to make sure that I have turned on procurement here. And once I've done that, then I'll see the procurement dashboard. A couple other things that you'll notice here that I have 2 saved, 0 ready for purchase, and then I've got in here my requisition list. I've got a couple requisitions that I've pre-entered, and then I also have some quick links, things like I need to maybe enter in a requisition or view a requisition or find a requisition. So let me show you how you can use this all from your homepage. So I'm going to go to enter a purchase requisition. So you'll notice firsthand that it's going to take you directly to the purchase requisition entry screen, again, saving you some clicks. And from that perspective of going into purchasing transactions, purchase requisition entries, that's about 3 clicks. Did it with 1 click. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just enter in a sample transaction. I'm going to purchase some pens. And these are going to be some fancy pens, so they're going to be $5 each. And I'm going to purchase it from this vendor. So that looks good to me. Now at this point in time, let's say I wanted to save this requisition because I'm going to maybe do some additional research on some vendor quotes to find the best price for my supplies that I'm going to add. So I'm just going to save this at this point in time. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Now I'm going to refresh my homepage so we can see what the impact is on that procurement dashboard. So you'll notice now I've got an updated item of 3. Now let's say I want to go back to that requisition and actually submit it in this case and change that status for ready to purchase. So I'll pull up that transaction and hit submit. And that's just indicating out of the box that that requisition is now ready for somebody to take it from a requisition and move it to a purchase order. Now you'll see that, okay? Now let's say I had workflow turned on for this, just to show you what the impact or difference would be. I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. So I'm gonna go into company setup, workflow, workflow maintenance. I go back to my home page. So now what you'll see here, it's gonna be a little bit more updated for our requisition users. Again, you'll see that saved icon, but the difference here on this for or requisition management and workflow is that you're now going to see on our requisition list, similar to that navigation list that we were looking at, it's going to give them the workflow status that they're looking for, as well as the assignee. In my experience, it saves a lot of questions, especially to the workflow administrators, of them getting emails or phone calls as to, hey, I've entered in a requisition. I'm not sure who the requisition is currently sitting with. Can I get a status? We can direct them directly to their homepage within Dynamics GP, in particular their procurement dashboard, and we can see, if I were to go to one of my saved ones, and if I were to submit this, for example, they would see firsthand, go ahead and submit that, they would see firsthand who it's sitting with. Additionally, some other items that you can see within this procurement dashboard, as I mentioned before, another common question that we see from requisition users is, I need to find not only the status, but maybe I need to do a reprint for my own personal records. So what that might entail is they might need to go into the purchase requisition inquiry screen within the application to pull up their PO or their requisition. Here we can show them that they can do a couple different ways for filtering. We can either show them that they can find a particular requisition by hitting the find icon and finding the requisition that way, or we can show them they can find it by the requisition date or even by the vendor. There's different options for them to go and do that inquiry on their own. And then let's say once they find that item that they want to look at, true to GP fashion, they can drill back into it and pull up the requisition inquiry zoom screen, for example. And as one of the newer features, they can now print that purchase requisition to the screen and save that for their records. That's the procurement dashboard. Like I said, there's definitely some great features and benefits to showing your requisitioners how to use this tool. It will save you not only from a management perspective time, but it also saves them time and headache and to answering those common questions that they're going to be asking you a lot of. How do I enter in the requisition? Where do I go to enter in that purchase requisition? How do I find the purchase requisition that I've submitted? How do I do a reprint? It's all going to be within this homepage, saving you and them a lot of clicks. So the next thing that I'm going to show is our Excel refreshable reports. When you first deploy the application, there are some out-of-the-box Excel refreshable reports available to you in all the different series, whether it's the financial series, the sales series, or the purchasing series. And those are going to be in the following core areas. So if in the financial series over here on the left-hand side, I'll see an icon called Excel reports. So in here, the benefit of using Excel reports, twofold. For you as a GP user, obviously there's going to be some benefit in terms of getting data rather than using SmartList, getting data out of the application and dumping it to Excel. The other benefit is if you point your non-GP users to the specific folder location where these reports live, they can actually open them up and refresh the data directly from GP themselves. So for example, let's say I wanted to take a look at a default Excel refreshable report. Maybe I want to look at the current account financial journal. I'll go ahead and click on that. And again, as I was just showing you from the navigation perspective, you have your navigation list up at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and click View. And that's going to pull up, in this case, something for SmartList users that will probably look very familiar in Excel, the current financial list journals. And again, as I mentioned, if you're not a GP user, if you want to give access to your non-GP users, I would simply point them to the folder location that these reports reside in. And so that, if I go back to the application case, is going to be in my C drive. So I'm going to go navigate there. So what I find typically with this feature is that once we find the location of those reports or where they live, oftentimes what we'll do for those non-GP users is we'll add these reports as a shortcut to their desktop or to a location where they can access them. Again, the goal being that they can pull them up on their own. So let's say I wanted to look at the GL transaction report. I can go ahead and do that, right? Go back to my Excel live reports. So one thing that you are going to notice is because it is broken out by series, if it's in that folder location, let's say you wanted to just grant users access to the financial series, you can do that adding it to a short desktop. The purchasing series or sales series. So again, as an example, all of these reports you can either access in GP or via this link. So let's say I wanted to take a look at all those purchase requisitions that I was just entering in. So you can even show this to your non-GP users. They can pull up a list, and then from there they can do their own slice and dice of the data as they see fit. Okay. And again, just as a recap, from an accessibility perspective, they are all available within the application under the left-hand side in the different series, or you can alternatively access them via that folder that I just showed you. There are ways, let's say, for example, you wanted to customize or modify these types of reports or even deploy them using a product called SmartList Builder. You can use SmartList Builder to deploy Excel refreshables as well. So that's a great way to leverage those modifications that you are using with that application and allowing both GP and non-GP users to pull data out of the application. The last feature that I want to talk about, if I go back to my page here, is SmartList. So with SmartList, it's a great tool if you're not using it. Couple ways you can navigate to it. What I've seen folks do is they'll perhaps add it to their homepage. They might create a smart list favorite and add that feature to their homepage. So you can see here, I've got a couple of examples of that where I've created a smart list, perhaps for my past due customer transactions. So I want to monitor that. The way that I'm doing that again is I'm going back to customize this page. And I'm adding, just for the purposes of this, the to-do, make sure that that's available to me. And then the next thing that I would do is I'd come into my smart list. And let's say, for example, I want to monitor my receivables transactions. Go to my receivables transactions past due customers, and maybe I want to make some changes to that so again it does alert me on that home page. What I'm going to do is click on favorites. Perhaps I want to rename this. Then I want to add this as a favorite and reminder to my home page. A couple things that I like to tell folks on this is that this feature where it says number of records versus total of column, it's a one or other. So it's a very common question that I get. Can I do both? So could I click both this radio button and this radio button, have that available to you? And I cannot. So either you choose to be alerted when this record count in this view exceeds a certain limit. A couple examples of why you might do that is perhaps you in your search you put in your own predefined parameters of maybe you want to monitor when this list exceeds $1,000, so you can start making customer calls or whatnot. That's where that number of records would be a good example. Or perhaps you're wanting to monitor it just at the total column level. So I want to look at maybe the current transaction amount. That's where those two differences would potentially come into play. So let's say I'm going to do in this particular case, I just want to know when the number of records is greater than 0. Okay, so now twofold of what's going to happen is I'll see in my past due customer transactions, I'll see that save favorite. If I minimize my smart list, I refresh my home page, I'm now going to see here's my past due customers sample. Common question that I get is what's the difference between you can see that there's a record count of 8 versus in this case a dollar count. So let's say I want to change this preference accordingly so that it mimics, if you will, what I'm seeing here. So it's a dollar amount again versus a transaction account. A couple ways I can do that is I can go back to my smart list and I can click on favorites. Here I want to be careful and select in my favorite and reminder. I want to modify this. Maybe I just want to override it. Get better way. I want to indicate display as Q. Go ahead and refresh my home page. Let's go back here. Let's show you the other method then. Not sure why that's minimize this. I'm going to click on this pencil here. So on my GP reminders, I'm going to click on that expansion arrow and I'm going to find, oh, there it is. Okay, so here's my sample 2. And from this, from my reminder preferences, I'm just going to go ahead and hit modify. So I can change that customer reminder or smart list favorite notification. So again, a couple ways that I could have done this or change it is I can go to my smart list, click modify, perhaps rename it to another smart list favorite, and then change those custom reminder preferences. Or I could, as I'm in this screen, go to my reminder preferences. identify the reminder that I have in place, click on it, and hit modify. So then it shows the display as queue. Let me actually get rid of a couple of those too as well. So there is going to be a limit to the amount that you're going to see in that screen. So I'm just going to remove this one. And I'm going to remove this one so we can see. There we are. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you, so it's just a kind of a quick refresher for folks that are not using SmartList and not using that feature of SmartList reminders. Highly encourage you to take advantage of that. The next one though, that's another uncommonly used or leveraged feature that's going to be under SmartList export solutions. So the idea behind export solutions is that you're recording a macro and leveraging that macro in such a fashion that when you export the data from SmartList to Excel, it's going to do the additional legwork. That additional legwork, so for example, might be that we want to take customer or look at customer transactions or customer line item transactions within the application. And then once we export that data, we might be doing things like putting that information in a pivot chart or a graph, things of that nature. So leveraging the utility so that it saves us some time. I'm going to briefly show you how you can set that up in your environment now. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, ways that you can approach this, is you want to identify, of course, the smart list that you're going to want to use in this particular scenario. And then you also want to identify what that process is going to look like, right? So what is it that I want to do? What's my end goal? So let's say, for example, I want to look at sales invoices, line items by customer. And then when I pull that to Excel or using my smart list, maybe I want to do some additional work in Excel. Maybe I want to create a pivot table and just look at an analysis on my customers, looking in particular of the items that they're ordering from me and the quantity and the extended cost. So first, I'm going to do a quick report. Okay. So let's say, for example, in this particular scenario, I'm finding myself exporting this particular smart list out to Excel every time. And really what I'm trying to do is make it in such a way that this sheet refreshes in a way that when I'm creating my pivot tables or charts, that those charts that I've created in Excel will refresh along with that data that I'm pulling from SmartList. Right? So how do I do that? So the first thing that I'm going to do is when I export this out, I'm going to create my macro. So I'm going to go to my developer tool. I wait for Excel to catch back up with me. Okay, I guess it's not being very cooperative at this point. Well, let's shift gears. So let me show you, I've predefined or pre-created that macro, and that's what I was just about to show you. So essentially what I've done is when I click on developer, I'm gonna hit record, and the keystrokes that I've recorded would have been to delete this page, right? Because I want to clear, again, the goal here is once I pull it to Excel, I want to have refreshed information on this first sheet. The next thing that I would do, bear with me here just 1 second, I'm gonna see if I can get Excel to cooperate. Okay. So again, I'm gonna hit record, and I might call this clear. So clear data. Okay. I'm just gonna hit clear contents, and then I'm gonna hit stop recording. Now I'm gonna take that, so this Excel file, if I go to macros, or to take a look at this, it has essentially a macro of me clearing out that content. And so now I want to save this as a template. So I'm going to do file save as. Now this is a very critical step at this point. I want to make sure that if I save this, I want to make sure that whoever behind me, if it's going to use this particular macro recording for my smart list, has access to that folder location. If they don't, they might run into some errors in that process when they try and export it out using the export solutions. And the other key piece is because I have a sheet that has a macro enabled on it, I want to make sure that I'm saving this Excel file as Excel macro enabled workbook. And then I want to give it a name. So let's say, I'm going to go ahead and close that down. And so now on this smart list, I'm going to go back into smart list, and then I want to go to export solutions. Now I want to associate this particular macro to this smart list or any other smart list that I want to be able to leverage that macro with. So I'm going to go ahead and name this. And then I'm going to go to that folder location. And in this case, you can have a couple different options here. And I've seen this done multiple ways. I've seen it where people are, in this scenario, I'm wanting to basically clear out the data that I'm exporting or have on that sheet each time. So that means that I have a preparation macro. Once I export the data, I want a macro to run and then prepare the file. Other situations I've seen folks use what's called a completion macro. So they might extract the data, then they're doing some additional work within Excel. They record that macro accordingly, and then they label it as a completion macro when it comes to export solutions. In this case, I'm just doing a preparation. In terms of preparation macro and why I'm naming it as cleared, that's the name that I gave it from a macro perspective in that sheet. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to do is associate it to any of the smart list favorites that I have within the application. And I'm going to do that right in here, works for favorites. And I'm going to identify and then I'll hit save. So the one thing right off the bat, we're gonna have to go back in here and change this, is it should say Excel. So give me just a moment here. Open up that file. Again, good example of why it's critical to make sure that you're saving the file correctly. So I'm just gonna get rid of that. The other thing to watch out for is on the application side is you can use this feature if you were doing anything in Excel. Another good example of how I'm seeing folks use export solutions, think of it as like another way, maybe you're using mail merge macro. You want to take data from a smart list and use that to prepare maybe a letter or prepare mass emails, things of that nature, to where you wanted to use or export the data into Word and do some functionality in there. You can see that you have that availability as well. So I'm going to resave that. All right, that looks a little bit better. So now I'm going to go exit out of my smart list momentarily here. If I were to go back to that favorite, the other thing that I would now also want to do, so you'll see down when I click on this drop down here, I've got a couple different options now. So I have another predefined smart list exploit solutions available to me. So you can, as you can see, have multiple different versions of it, which is also beneficial. You also have the ability to do a quick report. Now, the difference between the two is that these two drop-down options were associated to that export solutions. This quick report is me just pulling the data directly out of like a normal smart list. So the next thing that I want to do with that macro is associate some pivot tables to it as well. So in order to do that, I'm going to pull up another predefined template I've got here. Bear with me, Excel is having some challenges. Okay. So what I want to do now is after I've created that macro, again, this would be the next layer in my example of taking it to a pivot table and then saving that new Excel file accordingly. So all right, so I would go up to my data tab. See if we can end Excel again one more time. Catch that back up. Okay, so on my data tab, at this particular instance, again, I want to insert in this particular example, perhaps a pivot chart, or maybe I'm doing a pivot table, whatever it is that I need to do. So let's do first the pivot table. Add in my customer number. Maybe I also want to see the customer name. Whatever makes the most sense to you. And then I want to see perhaps the extended price. And then maybe I want to see the item number. Kind of clean this up a little bit. This would be my pivot table. And then maybe on top of this Excel sheet, I also do a chart. Okay. And then I want to rename this. So the step that'll tie all of this together is remember that I have a macro created for this tab. So what I want to do is when I'm saving after I've done that additional legwork, I want to make sure that I'm doing a file save as and then overriding that template that I created. Again, I want to make sure that I'm saving it as that Excel enabled work macro. Okay. And the reason I'm doing that is if we recall from this perspective, the macro that I have is, well, every time that I pull a new Excel sheet out of SmartList, it's going to run a preparation macro to clear out or refresh this data with the new data that I've got from SmartList, and then subsequently update my pivot tables and my chart. So now what I'm left with, in a sense, is I don't have to every time recreate that pivot table or chart when I'm pulling the data out from Excel or from SmartList to Excel. Okay. And just to recap, how I would pull that back out would be under Excel, and then I would click that appropriate export solutions favorite that I've saved. And that concludes the content that I have for today. Are there any questions at this point in time?
All right, Tiffany, we do have a couple questions here. How does this differ from SmartList and Management Reporter?
Good question. So from a management reporter perspective, what I see people using management reporter for would be just general ledger data, right? And so they go and create a report in management reporter if they have access to it, and maybe add in pivot tables or whatnot. The difference here in this case is that you're leveraging the capabilities of SmartList in the sense that you're now able to look at the submodules, right? So you're able to look at purchasing and the vendor master data, the item master data, all of that information that's in the subledger versus the GL. So that would be the key difference.
All right, great. It seems that our Excel reports, not all but some, are pulling stock data. How do we change that? Specifically on the purchasing dashboard.
Not sure.
I'm not sure either.
So it sounds like that maybe we can take note of that individual, and I'm happy to reach back out to them on a one-on-one basis to figure out what's happening there.
And do we have any other questions today? Please enter them into the chat box. We'll give one more minute here. All right, great. Well, with that, I would like to take the time to thank you all for attending our virtual Let's Learn Live Summit. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for a great session covering Microsoft Dynamics GP tips and tricks. We wish we could have met with you all in person and appreciate your patience with any technical difficulties, but are so glad we were able to provide you with the latest updates in Dynamics GP remotely. As a reminder, you may be eligible for up to 5 CPE credits total for attending the summit. Please be sure to fill out the emailed survey of each session you attended. If you'd like to learn more about Dynamics GP capabilities through a business process review, please reach out to our email at us-marketing@columbusglobal.com. We have many free virtual events coming up on our calendar. This Thursday, in fact, we have a 5-hour Microsoft Power Apps workshop called App in a Day. And next month, we have 3 brand new featured summits on life sciences, food and beverage, and manufacturing industries. Please visit the link here in the chat box to visit the events tab on our US website at www.columbusglobal.com or contact us to register online for free. I'll send that link over. And that concludes today's summit. Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and give a few minutes back to you. Thanks again to all our presenters and for all the attendee participation. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.